And we are live. Welcome, listeners. Welcome, viewers, to Religion Zero number 9. Thank you for coming on to the channel. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Today, we've got so far a one-man down, my co-host for Amos Joe, who should be joining us shortly. I have a sneaking suspicion the poor guy is still sleeping. But you know what you can do? These young millennials and such, it's just kind of part of the territory. So today's discussion, we're going to be having a chat about the crisis of faith, our encounters with atheism, and, for believers, what we can learn from those different lessons. And we got about 3 out of 4. So let's have a quick introduction around the screen. Corey, what's going on with you, man? I know you're in a new location, you were saying.
Yeah, I recently moved last weekend to couch surf and save some money while I'm trying to buy some real estate property, but the markets are god awful at the moment for buyers, so it's taken a lot longer than I expected. So thankfully I have some friends and family to let me couch surf, hoard my money, and make sure I can buy it the best deal I can. But the downside of that is the internet here is god awful. It is Podunk, Missouri, nowhere near the city. And not on top of that, the Wi-Fi router is like literally catty corner to where my free room is. So I have the worst signal with bad internet on top of that. So if I randomly crash out, I crash out. That's what God intended.
Good to have you. Good to have you. The man, Bobby, what's going on that side of the world, my friend?
Yes, sir. Just loving it. Just been making lots of political videos lately. Just about all the craziness going on in the world. And it's really just kind of finishing out my time here, having fun, taking it one day at a time. Just walking the streets of Thailand, been doing some work projects, been really trying to get things in place for my business once I get back to America, probably hopefully in the first week of August. And that's been it, really.
Are they allowing flights out of Thailand right now, or that's still at the end of July or June?
Yeah, it's June 30th is what they're saying.
June 30th.
But
okay.
They're definitely not letting any in until June 30th. But people are speculating it might even go longer than June 30th because there's a waiting list of 8,000 repatriates that hasn't been processed yet. And those are at the top of the list. They're not going to let a bunch of tourists step ahead of the people away from their families that are trying to get back here. So, flights could be banned even longer than June 30th. So who knows?
Fair enough. Fair. And very briefly, our friend Tom is having his interview on MLD. I know some of us caught a little bit of that. If you just want to maybe chime in really quick as to what you thought. Bobby, you want to take that?
Yeah. Tom's a good guy. He and I have had, we're friends on a personal level, and he's going through some self-discovery right now, and he's processing a lot of what he's going through publicly. And in his mind, he's trying to help others benefit from his pain and struggle and crisis that he's going through. And he's sorting things out. And I hope he finds peace and happiness, and I hope he finds himself, and I hope he sticks by God's side, which he's saying he's doing. So we'll see. Yeah.
Amen. Corey, what's your 2 cents on what's happening with Tom? Because you had a fantastic interview with him.
Yeah.
I missed because I was indisposed. You guys know what was going on.
Yeah. You were not on Earth at the moment. You were.
I was exploring the universe.
Yeah, you got your own SpaceX competition going now. But Tom and I had a little quick chat interview on Wednesday morning. That's on my channel. It was very interesting. It was really just exploring his thought process, what he's changed. He's going through his own little life milestone. He's getting a lot of hate for it, but he's also getting people high-fiving him for it, and he's in himself, that's always a weird thing when you do something and you get high hate but also high praise, and life's always somewhere in the middle. So but I can definitely identify with what he's going through. I've had my own crises of faith and all that stuff, so it's always good to have a friend, be able to hash it out, say what you need to say, so you can get some good feedback from people you trust. And what more can you say? Yeah, he's doing his thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I reached out to Tom right away. He knows I love him. He knows I'm praying for him. I don't judge, even if I have a different opinion than him on a lot of things he's talking about. That I don't think any less of him as a man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, just my 2 cents on it. Well, firstly, a quick update on myself. I am still supposed to be moving to Wales. God alone knows when that's happening, seeing as their lockdown releases even later than England. So I'm in England right now. It's like 2 weeks behind. I don't even know if I'll be able to get out there. I may be in Wales next week, Sunday. So gentlemen, I may not be here for the show. I'm hoping I will be, but I can't make any promises, of course. And I did manage to catch Tom's interview with Conk, and he was opening up as Heather in the chat, reminded me that he was definitely very articulate with his language, and his drunken sailor attitude came out, quite ferociously, which was quite interesting. And he contacted me as well privately through Twitter, and I explained to him sometimes that when you've come to an avenue of freedom in your life in something that you haven't, you've kind of been holding back for a tendency, there is a tendency to overdo it. You kind of, it's like a floodgate that's released, and you kind of get a little crazy. And to the uninitiated, it looks like, oh my goodness, this person is like, he's gone to the devil, it's stone and all that good stuff. But no, it's the human body is, it's had this pent up energy. It's a release that's taking place. Trust the Christ in you. It's going to calm down. You're going to regulate. The language will clean up, all these other things. It's just, you've been so repressed for so long. It's got to come out. And, you don't stay in that place generally.
But Brook, are you saying it's evil to say potty words?
No, I mean, as Paul said it, right? All these things I count as dung. If you actually look up the word skubalon, it's shit. It's actually shit. Like, you could hear the King James translators like, we can't put shit in the Bible. Can we put shit in the Bible? And they changed it. They changed it to dung. So it's a profanity.
Yeah.
So
He didn't say filthy rags either.
No, right. Yeah. It's menstrual cloths. Yeah, exactly. So
we got to keep our voice pure.
It kind of reminds me. It's almost like Saint Augustine in reverse. Like when Saint Augustine converted. When St. Ambrose of Milan converted him and baptized him, and he became the great bishop of Hippo, he went in the other extreme direction. He went from being just playboy, most of his life of, high sex. And then there's even been a few errors found in some of his sexual ethics. That he went like in the other extreme, like maybe some remnants of his Manichaeism that weren't fully like purified, like towards the end of his life. But, so yeah, we're all on our journey. The key is to just stick close to God and, just do the best we can to sort it out and, keep the faith,
Amen. And I mean, that's a great segue into today's topic about keeping the faith.
Absolutely.
Or losing it.
Well, yes, that's kind of the direction. So, I mean, I think we all have various stories. Not all of us have necessarily delved into the realm of atheism. Conk, I know you've definitely had that. I was sharing with Bobby. I had a brief stint of that. It didn't last too long. But I mean, we've all had nights of the soul, the dark night of the soul, where we've questioned our faith and God, where are you? These types of things. And it's something that's not generally discussed in the church. And I think, again, this is amongst the sexual issues. I think, the not accepting doubt or even questions in the church has pushed a lot of men away, because men were logical, we're reasonable, we have questions, we want to understand things, we're not as quick just to take things on faith. And again, this is a place that the church hasn't really given a lot of answers. So I wanted everybody to kind of share a little bit about, just their personal journey, and we'll just take it from there. So, Corey, you want to start us off, because I know you've been into the atheist realm.
Yeah, I was the cool kid atheist, religion's dumb guy for like a year or two. And it all started interesting. So I grew up, Southern Baptist-y. It's, girls wearing pants is frowned upon, hyper rules, Southern Baptist religion. And that's kind of we grew up in, and that's just kind of all because we never visited other churches of other denominations or other faiths or anything. So we're like, I'm just like, when I'm a kid, I guess this is it. This is what everyone does. And right when the internet started getting cool, like in the early mid 2000s, I was in high school, and I realized early on, I was kind of like an early adopter of the internet, where I realized, wow, I don't need school. I can learn whatever the hell I want. You know what I mean? And so I went down my own rabbit hole of the internet, researching and studying whatever I thought was cool. And I was like, essentially, fuck school. I like whatever I want to listen to and whatever I want to learn. So I started learning, and I got really heavy down into like science and astrophysics and all of that type of stuff. Learning about like gravitational wells and aerogel and how that is the world's lightest, the world's least dense solid we have. It's literally frozen particles in air. I was studying all this stuff and cool, and eventually, like, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it came from like some of the sciencey stuff was also like Richard Dawkins articles, because he kind of paralleled that line between like science and philosophy kind of stuff. And so I read some of that, and I realized there's this whole recollection of talking about how dumb religion is. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. That tracks. You know what I mean? At first thought. So I kind of gave it up, and I just realized, in my version of religion was boring and stupid, right? Like, it was, okay, you got to go do these rules. You got to sing these hymns. You got to have a little overhead projector, because it was an old school church. And we sing the same songs. We have the same messages of just like one or two verses, and somebody makes, a fake Bible school life lesson out of it. I mean, there's very little difference between our Sunday service and our Sunday school service, if you know. It was all like basic stuff. Like, they didn't really go any deep. They didn't talk about anything cool. It was just rules and elementary school level classes. And I'm like, this is all dumb. These guys are way smarter. You know what I mean? They're actually talking about real stuff. And I was like, okay. So I was like, okay, I'm upgrading my belief system, that now I don't believe in this, basic level stuff. I want to learn the advanced stuff. And so I was like that for a while. I still went to churches because that's what my family did. I just didn't care. I would like draw or, read a book about science while church was happening and all that. And eventually, and I was just like that. And like, I had my own little passive atheisty mind. Like, I was like, okay, just dismiss all that immediately. And eventually, what was it? How I came back. Do we want to get there, or do we want to do Bobby's background?
Yeah, we'll do the full circle.
It. Yeah,
yeah. So definitely. But I mean, you were obviously in faith before, so you were saying that the reading the science and reading Dawkins, like the God Delusion, are those the things that kind of brought you to that point?
Yeah, and I never actually read the Dawkins book. I just read a bunch of his like articles and blog posts and people talking about it. Because, back in the day, it was all about forums. You know what I mean? Yes. Forums was the cool thing in the early mid-2000s. So I was reading a lot of forums of people who read God Delusion and were telling me about it. So, like, I was a dumb enough high schooler that I didn't want to read it, but I listened to other people that read it and assumed they were right. You know what I mean? And it's that kind of foolish thing. And I'm like, hey, they sound smarter than everyone else that I talk to at church, so I'm going to listen to them, right? They use bigger words.
Was it a bit of like teenage angst, would you say? Because, like probably the rest of your school is probably all believers sort of thing, and it's kind of the punk thing to do. Would you say that played a part in it as well? Yeah,
I would say it wasn't necessarily like the punk anarchy side. That came way later, and I'm still in that one. But it was more of like the intellectual superiority that these people thought it through and dismissed it, and now we're looking for real truth in the universe instead of stuff some guy with gray hair and glasses and old ladies yelling at you in church. They don't have the answers. These guys might, though, kind of thing. And so I felt intellectually superior because I evolved past kindergarten thinking on religion, so to speak.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That's honest. That's a pretty honest way to put it, Conk. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say. Bobby, how about you? I mean, we kind of discussed briefly before. You maybe never went full atheist, but of course, we've all had those dark nights of the soul, if you want to share.
Oh, yeah. I've had I've had black nights of the soul. Like I've had nights that were so dark. Oh, man. When I look back on just my whole journey, I've always loved Jesus from a very young age. That hasn't changed. I still do. And I would say that's what kept me, like, in Catholicism, we always talk about the 3 theological virtues. And we call them theological. We distinguish them from the cardinal virtues, the intellectual virtues, the moral virtues. They're theological because they unite you directly to God. Like he's the direct immediate object, theos, right? So those three virtues kept me pretty tied to God for most of my life. I mean, I spent I spent most of my life, all of my childhood nailed to a cross. Like my relationship with God for like half of my life, maybe even more than half of my life, was just based on just me clinging to him out of just pain and sorrow. And just like, I would say this, for a long time, my relationship with God was almost, I wouldn't say purely transactional, but there's an author named Peter Kraft. I don't know if you guys ever heard of Peter Kraft, but he said,
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, he said a lot of people treat Jesus like a drug dealer because they only seek him for consolations. They're like, hey, Jesus, like most people's prayer life is, hey, Jesus, give me some more of that stuff that makes me feel so good. You know,
just Father God, give me some good feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't put mine that simply. I mean, I was in a lot of legit pain, like from stuff I went through as a kid. I mean, I was in the foster care system. My dad wasn't there. It was a lot of stuff. And then even if you grow up with the white picket fence and the nice childhood in a good school district with low crime and two parents in a household, you're still got to go through all the angst of adolescence. Like, and that tries us all, no matter what situation we're in. So I would say like my relationship with God, kind of like my struggle with God, went in phases. It's kind of like he carried me for a long time. And then as I grew and got stronger, he kind of, held me by the hand. And then as I grew and got stronger, he's kind of like leading me from behind now. Like I'm kind of walking ahead of him. And I know he's behind me. And I know he's there looking out for me and looking over my shoulder. But I've had to learn, I'll be honest, guys, probably the biggest like struggle I'm going through in my spirituality now is I kind of had to relearn how to love God. Like I have to learn a new skill set, because it's like, it was really easy to love God when I was going through it. Cause I would just like I said, I would cling to him. It's just easy to run into the arms of Jesus when you're in all that intense pain. And when you've got no control over your circumstances, you got pretty much no control over your life. And that kind of makes it easy. But now, I've grown up, I make good money. I live life on my own terms. I've almost gone to the other extreme. It's like when I was a kid, I had zero autonomy. I mean, I had less autonomy than most kids. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't have much autonomy. You do it what and when you're told. But in my case, I had even less because I was a ward of the state of Michigan for a very long time. So I'd go from group home to group home, school to school, just very unstable life. And I didn't know where I'd be living. And just when I get used to living in one place and making friends or adjusting here, boom, the social worker ships me off somewhere else because some weird thing changes. And then I went from that kind of like non-autonomy and instability to having like otherworldly autonomy. Like I've been working from home for the last 20 years. I'm like the movie matinee king, man. I don't see new movies like Friday night. I see them like, like Friday morning when I'm like the only one in the theater, And so now I've got to learn, and I'm still learning, to be honest. Like I'm still learning how to do this like every day. It's like, how do I love God when I'm not just surrounded by chaos and pain and trauma? Like, how do I love God just to love him, to love him for who he is? Like the old cliche, rather than seeking the consolations of God, you seek the God of the consolations. I'm still kind of learning how to do that, to be honest. And I feel like I'm running on fumes, to be honest, because like I said, it's weird. Like it's not easy. It's not as easy for me to love God as it used to be, if that makes sense. Because I only knew one mode of loving him. So I'm trying to learn that new mode, to be honest. And it's quite the dark night. It's a very purifying walk that I have with him right now. I guess it's maturing me. I hope I'm a more mature Christian now than I was in the past, but I don't know. I'll find out when I take that last breath. So,
yeah, it is very interesting. The dichotomy between believing in God because you need to, because you're hurting, and believing in God even when you're in abundance and everything's going well. Right.
Yeah.
He definitely takes a backseat. You're like, okay, Jesus, everything's cool. I'll call you when it sucks again.
Like I got Rollo. I hear Rollo's voice in my head, like making necessity a virtue. Is that what I was doing for the first half of my life?
And not to say that there's anything wrong with that either.
Right.
And
True.
I mean, something that I kind of console myself with before I get into my story. There are two accounts of people and their relationship with God in pertains to the love of God. There was Peter, who always boasted in his love for God. And then there was the Apostle John, who always boasted in Christ's love for him. And we saw the fruit of that, where Peter eventually ended up denying Christ 3 times. And John was the only one there. So there's nothing wrong with loving God. I'm definitely not saying that. I'm just saying that we love him because he first loved us. So when I would struggle with that, and this kind of brings me into my own story, I wasn't raised in a religious home. I mean, we were kind of traditionally, I think, Church of England, probably Anglican. I actually used to go more to the Catholic Church than I ever did, but that was mostly for the girls. And I had a pretty radical transformation experience for the first time, where I actually did hear a voice, right? Like, wow, what's going on, sort of thing. And that kind of led me down the path. And I mean, when we get into the stories about how we kind of came back to our faith, and Corey, this might resonate with you. I know the Mormons kind of played a part with you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What got me into it was actually the Jehovah's Witnesses that actually got me to read the Bible, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything. I was watching whatever Christian television we had, and I didn't know the difference between this and that. And it was just all the same to me. And Jehovah's Witnesses started coming to my house, and I started reading and such. And probably from about the time of 18 onwards, I was pretty much in church and, just doing ministry. I was like picking up the street people and stuff like that. I did healing ministry as well, as I think I've touched on that as well. So I've seen ridiculous miracles, people coming out of wheelchairs, deaf ears opening. I've seen people raised from the dead, or, just some things I can't even explain what it was. I've seen encounters with supposedly like the demonic, where people like fly up on the ceiling, and just some absolute insanity. And despite all of that, there came a point where, much like what Bobby was saying, I was just in such tremendous pain. From firstly, it was a time of a lot of guilt, shame, and like condemnation. I was seeing all these great things. I was doing all of this missionary work, and yet I was still addicted to porn. I was, still struggling, just mentally with all these terrible thoughts and stuff like that. And it literally got to the point where I was like, I'm done. Like, either God shows up, or I'm just done with all this. I want to die. I don't want anything more to do with this kind of thing. And that was kind of like a revitalization. I'll share that story another time. God did show up in a very powerful way. And then even after that, I went around the world. We were preaching. We were doing conferences. We were doing all these great things. And I got the revelation of grace, and I understood, the understanding of the new covenant and how we can't earn it. As much as we repent of our bad works, we must also repent of our good works, because those don't get us any brownie points. It's all by his goodness. It's all by his grace. It's the goodness of God that leads to repentance. And I was preaching this fantastic message, but I wasn't seeing it in my life at all. I was still struggling to pay my phone bills. I was still struggling, with relationally. I was, it's supposed to be this great kingdom, and it's supposed to be, all this, grace and mercy and all these great things. And one day I was just like, maybe it's all in my head. Like maybe even the healing stuff, maybe human beings naturally have the ability to heal, and I'm just using the church as an element to kind of tap into that power. And I came up with excuses for everything, because I said, either I've been completely deceived, or there is no God. So I started to like run through and deconstruct all of my experiences and stuff like that. And when I kind of got rid of that, it didn't make anything better. I said, well, then there must be no God. And as I was telling Bobby in the conversation before we went live, that was another time I heard the voice of God laughing at me. I just heard this hysterical laughter, and I was just like, no, there's no God. And I just like, it's all bullshit. It's humans have more power than we know. It's the power of the mind. And I went down that road for about a couple months, I think. And to be honest, it was never going to last. It was just never going to work. Because even though I didn't have, you can deconstruct anything in the Bible. You could deconstruct anything in the church. I got stuck on two things. I got stuck on, and I guess this will kind of, now we could do like a discussion of how we kind of came out of those dark places and how we came out of atheism. for me, it was the resurrection of Christ was kind of insurmountable. So just understanding, the historical context, looking at the Bible in a historical way, the testimonies of the people and the Roman centurion, and, the fact that it was women that found it, the tomb empty and not men, kind of implies it was an actual account. And there was just so much surrounding the resurrection of Christ. It was just like, I really can't get around this. The conversion of the Apostle Paul, the boldness of the apostles who go from running from the cross to suddenly boldly preaching he's risen from the, like, what else could just explain all of these things? And that was a big one, as well as, I think, some of the science as well, like DNA. When I started looking at like the DNA information, it's like, what is the only source of information that we've ever had an experience with? It's always been an intelligence. It's always been a mind. And the human body is just filled with information and codes on how to fold the proteins. And I think something called irreducible complexity, which is a stumbling block for evolution, in the sense, like, if a woodpecker evolves a very strong beak that can penetrate the wood, but its skull doesn't develop at the same time the ability to withstand the blows of going into the wood, it's kind of a useless evolutionary term. You need multiple things to happen at once for it to have any evolutionary significance. And that was another problem for me. And as I said, it lasted a couple weeks. I was still angry at God, even when I kind of came back. Angry and bitter for a long time. I would say up until a couple years, maybe a year ago, really. Again, because I understood it was all by grace. So all good gifts came from God. I didn't see that kind of really manifesting in my life. And I think very much like what Bobby was saying, I had to go through that phase to the point where I could start putting trust in myself, in the gifts that he's put in me, not to rely on him so much. And, that's kind of where I'm at now. But let's go around about like how we kind of came out of those dark spaces and what we learned in that time. Yeah. So yeah, Corey, how did you come out of that?
Oh yeah. So there's the coming out of that and coming back to Christianity. But I mean, in general, I go through these every couple months. You know what I mean?
Good.
Not necessarily doubting does God exist and stuff, but it's like the whole nature of reality and what we assume and what narratives we're believing. We're all in the red pill space, and the blue pill is a narrative that we explain it as a narrative that's fed to you as a kid that's actually contrary to our nature, right?
Yeah.
And we just believe it blindly. And I think that's something I realized over and over again, is how much of our life is blind faith that we believe in. Like, just like most of the time, like if you're, like I called it before, the elementary thinking of the Bible, where you just go to church and read the Bible and this is what it is, you know what I mean? And you don't evaluate it for yourself. That's a type of blind faith. But likewise, I'm reading those forum posts of guys talking about a book I didn't read, and I had blind faith that they were also telling the truth. So I thought I was arrogant and prideful and, was evolving my thinking, but I just changed teams of who I was blindly following, right? I went from like a Chiefs fan to a Broncos fan. That's all that really happened. You know what I mean? At the end of the day. So what eventually the catalyst, though, for me changing my beliefs and starting to realize all this was a bunch of Mormons knocked on my door when I moved to a new small town. The town was called Berthoud, Colorado. It's like 1 square mile, and it's only like a high school and old people, and that's it. And because I was in Colorado, there's also a bunch of dispensaries there, which was really interesting. There was an equal amount of dispensaries to gas stations, just to say that. But I'm in a little tiny square town.
That's a marijuana dispensary for those who may not be familiar.
Yeah, because they were one of the first to medicinal and legalize it, Colorado was one of the first for that. But we just moved to that town. I was in community college at the time, I believe, and some Mormons came to my door, knocking, saw that we were new. Like, hey, can you come talk to us? And, normally you're like, the majority of people go, no, bye, and, hang up, slam the door in their face, right? Nobody ain't got time for that. But boy, did I have time for that. And so I used my superhero pride and arrogance skills, and I decided to do some real life trolling and shit posting, with them. And so I was like, yeah, this isn't just for the internet anymore. And so I invited him and we chatted for a bit. And obviously, for people who don't know, Mormon missionaries, they're usually 18 or 19. like fresh out of high school.
It's not.
They're
It's never a
required to do
fair
that.
fight.
Yeah, yeah. And they got their white shirts and ties and little name tags and stuff like that. But so they were fresh kids, and I was only probably 2 years older than them, I'm guessing. But you could tell they haven't been doing this very long. They were kind of scared that people accepted their offer and they didn't know what they were going to say. It was pretty interesting. So I had them come in. I got them some water because they can't drink soda because they're new fresh Mormons. And I had a St. Bernard at the time, so they'd come pet my St. Bernard puppy, and I'd give them some glass of water, and we'd sit and talk for 30 minutes or an hour. And I would just start like pointing out all the things that's wrong with Mormonism, or all the reasons why I don't believe you, and you guys have to convince me otherwise. It was like my old school Steven Crowder changing my mind. You know what I mean? I essentially just made those, and I did it every week for 9 weeks in a row, I think it was. And the problem is I would keep stumping them, and they would come back with a different elder from their church and slowly going up the hierarchy of people to talk to me, because, it's a Mormon thing that you have to keep trying if they're willing to try. Yeah. Like, even like, I clearly was never going to their side anyway, and they kind of got that. But the act that I was engaging with them meant they had to see this through. That's kind of like their little Mormon code, right? And so they keep bringing different elders. Like, one of them brought their dad once. One of them brought one of the elders and the deacons and stuff. And then I think one time they did bring the pastor and a dad once, and that was interesting. And it was just me talking to all of them and just pointing out all of these holes in between, like, because like at that time I thought Christianity was wrong, but I thought Mormons were super wrong. Because their Mormonism doesn't even conflict with Christianity, let alone the real world at the time of my thinking. So I was just I was acting as if I was a Christian. I said the Mormon doesn't hold up to the Bible, and I believe the Bible kind of thing. And at the time I actually didn't. I was just saying that to prove that, like, you guys aren't even Christian, even though you say you are. And so we went through that over and over again, and it was just nonstop stumps. And a lot of the answers I got was, well, it's the world's wisdom. We can't fully rely on that. And like at that time, I was like showing them the proof that like the word Jehovah doesn't actually exist. It's actually a mistranslation of Yahweh. And I found a list of every single time it got mistranslated all the way from down. And they go, well, that's the world's wisdom. No, that's documented history. Like, you can go look this up. This isn't wisdom.
So you attacked the Tetragrammaton? How dare you monster?
Yeah, take that. But because that was fun for me, and I think this was during like Christmas, winter break, where you have that 1 month off in college. So I was doing that, and it kind of bled into college as well. But I was like, okay, well, most of the time I've got a bunch of free time. So I started studying the Bible and studying the Book of Mormon. But as I was studying the Bible and I was looking up sources for it and things like that, I started to realize like the Bible does make a lot more sense for my life than I thought before. Like, I was finding stuff that those blind atheist guys, the blind faith of the atheists, were saying, and I was finding them disproving the Bible are like completely made up, and like all of their logic and theories of like what the Bible says and stuff like wasn't even in there, right? And so then I started reading it for my own, and I'm like, I think by the end of the 9 weeks, I think I've already like reconsidered myself a genuine Christian. I'm like, I understood more as I studied the Bible and studied religion and church history and all that stuff, where it actually came from, right? And that's where I really started to get into it again. And I kind of felt that new sense of purpose and awareness instead of like, oh, it's all science and it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what led me there. And then after I stopped talking to the Mormons and they did the thing, I just continued to keep studying and reading the Bible for fun, even after they stopped coming to my house. So, yeah. And then from there, I just learned a lot more about how important it is to play devil's advocate for everything. Everything you read, play devil's advocate, right? Because there's so many narratives and there's so many things we have blind faith on that we just don't question, right? And like we said before, like Red Pill is a big part of that. Like, what's one of the bases of Red Pill is like, start questioning what you're being told all the time, through the media and through your teachers and through your parents even, and through what other people are telling you. Start questioning that and see if it actually holds up to reality, right? And that's my kind of soapbox there. And that's kind of where I got to where I am now. But the crazy part about that is when you start getting that mindset of learning to actually be critical of everything you believe, you're going to get a lot of existential crises, and then after a while they start kind of getting fun, and now you look for them. Just like, what else can I completely dismantle and like realize was a lie told to me? You know what I mean? Money doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
I can keep going down the line. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, that's my spiel at the end of the day. I got more to say, but I also want to pass it around.
Yeah, I think it's very important what you're saying there. The deconstruction part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was in trouble when the church refused to let me ask questions, but we'll do that on the circular. Amos, thanks for joining us, my friend. But we're just going to hear from Bobby about what lessons he's learned coming out of those dark nights of the soul, and like what he uses himself to encourage. And then coming to you, Amos, have you had any experience with atheism? And you give us the full story, and we'll go from there. So, okay. Bobby, dark nights of the soul, my friend.
Oh man, well, you know. That phrase actually comes from one of our doctors of the church named St. John of the Cross, and he wrote two major works on that. One was called The Dark Night of the Soul. The other was called The Ascent of Mount Carmel. And he actually says there's two variations of that, and I believe I've been through both. The first one is called The Dark Night of the Senses, and the second one is called The Dark Night of the Spirit. So basically, the Dark Night of the Senses is like a surface level purification where when you come to God, you're a fresh convert, still committing frequent mortal sins and still struggling with, different vices and addictions and things like that. And then you go through a series of, spiritual dark nights, spiritual crises that purify you of those, that turn you away from that sin. But it doesn't quite catch it all. There has to be another dark night that you go through. And I call this like the Buster Dark Night of the Soul, because this is the one that gets down beneath it. It penetrates into the core of your spirit. It's called the Night of the Spirit. And he actually says that it's a terrible thing to go through. And in my case, I think the best way to describe, the crisis that I was in, it's not that I was ever angry at God. It's not that I was ever like, I'll be honest, I've never been tempted to atheism. Like I would have thoughts that would come like, oh, did Jesus really exist? But I was like 14 years old when I had those thoughts. So like, I was nowhere near like being an apologist to, just flick it off like a gnat like now. But kind of the way I used to view God, which will kind of dovetail into what, kind of helped me come out of that dark night. For a long time, this was an analogy I'd use. And I'd use this in my testimony everywhere, where I kind of saw God like this animal control specialist, right? And I was like this little kid getting attacked by a bear. And life was the bear. And God was the animal control specialist. And God's got tranquilizer darts. He's got bear mace. He's got nets. He's got those shocker taser things. He's got everything he can to put this animal down. And he's just standing there watching this animal maul this kid. And that's how I viewed God for like a really long time. Like, God, why are you standing there, Mr. Lord of the Universe? Can you throw a kid a bone here? Give me a hand here. Give me some help. But when I look at it, I mean, I'm still here. Like, none of those things I went through destroyed me. They made me stronger. They made me the man I am today. He was helping me during that whole time. But it just took me getting out of all those situations to realize that. And that's where that faith came in. I had to just hang in there. And a verse I would often like reflect on is Job 13, verse 15, where it says, though the Lord slay me, I shall trust in him. And that's how I felt, man. I just felt like God was slaying me. But then I realized he may not be like killing me. He's more like a surgeon that just for reasons of his own would prefer not to use anesthesia. So, he's doing this much needed surgery on me, but he wants me to feel every ounce of the pain so I can grow in that virtue and in that character like Hebrews 12 talks about. So, like I said, I've never like left God per se. Like, thankfully I've always been in his bosom and he's kept me. I have had moments of doubt about, whether he loved me. And it's kind of like I was telling, Brook in the pre-show, to me, doubt is a form of intellectual temptation, right? Like most people, when we think of temptation, we either think of sex, money, or chocolate if you're a chick, right? For guys, pretty much the only temptations we have are sex. And, but that's not the only form of temptation. Another form of temptation is doubt, because doubt, according to Aquinas, is considered a sin against faith if you succumb to it and if you actually act on it. So I kind of look at it like we're not judged by our temptations. We're judged by what we give into, by what we actually consent to and what we do. And sometimes the force of the temptation is so strong that we confuse the temptation for the consent. We're like, did I consent to that? Like, because it was so strong, you can't really tell if it got the best of you. But I would look at it like the fact that I was still able to fight and struggle, that was a sign of life. That I was still with God. So yeah, like I said, I don't have a love affair with God anymore like I used to have. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a mature thing. I think that's what it's like. I mean, I'm trying to learn. I'll put it to you like this, and I'm still in this journey. I'm trying to learn how to serve God without pay, because I'm used to being a spiritual mercenary. Like I said, I got used to treating Jesus like that drug dealer, saying, "Hey, Jesus, give me some of that stuff that makes me feel good." So now I'm going through withdrawals. Like I'm going through. I'm in the spiritual consolations methadone clinic right now, and hopefully I'll make it through this. We'll see.
Fantastic. I think something that really helped me, and we'll probably touch on this once we get back around. We all have questions about different doctrines, about all of these different types of things, and I don't think there's anything wrong with questioning. In fact, having the mind, and we hype up the Bereans, who they would study and do all these things. The intellectual side of Christianity is not a bad thing. And I know Corey, you've been into apologetics. Bobby, you've been into apologetics. And I think both Amos and I mean, I don't want to speak for Amos. But yeah, we'll probably touch on that a little bit about why the church is not as comfortable with certain questions. But Amos, you have been absent for the last 30 minutes. I know you've been with us for 10.
Shame.
Yeah, he is stoned the unbeliever. So yeah, we're discussing, as you know, atheism. Could you just share if you've had experience, what brought you into it? And
absolutely nothing with atheism. I'm a perfect believer.
Never doubted. Perfect.
Never doubted a single thing. So this is where Bobby and I would disagree. Like, I think, so we're, Israel, the nation of Israel, like the name Israel, well, Brook, you know what it means, right?
Yeah, he who struggles with God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's where I kind of think like it's not every case, but I think when I talk to people, specifically other Christians or people who used to be Christians, and there's a lot of different angles to it when it comes to atheism. Like when I come across atheists, like I know one thing that we've talked about is when we, for us doing the show, we're kind of offering what we call the inside out perspective, not the outside in perspective. Cause I come across a lot of these, excuse me, a lot of these atheists or former Christian types, and they tend to have this view, like, I'll talk to people and like they'll ask me like, well, what is your experience with Christianity? I say, I've grew up Christian, became a minister and all this, and then I'll talk to some other people who are atheists, and they go, I went to Christian school. So there's like a different way that I see people like go about faith, and it seems typically like atheism is something that people kind of approach because they've sort of reluctantly had religion in their life. It's like, I went to a Christian school. My parents made me go to church. Whereas for me, it's like, I actually eventually it came to a point where like they call, faith. I made faith my own. And so when that happened, and then I started to kind of struggle and wrestle with things, I started to realize like, I personally believe like there's something about when people come across atheism, come across doubting things, that if you're not doubting at some point, I think you're not doing it right. At some point you need to really start to question things, which is why like I consider myself agnostic when it comes to Christianity. Like I'll say I'm a Christian around Christians, but I'll say I'm agnostic around everyone else because, well, I'm not like a Christian religiously and in the way that I think that most people might consider it. I still consider myself like, I still believe in God to a degree. Sort of, it's not really me, God, Jesus, and all this stuff. It's like, it's me and God at the same time. I live my life as if what is it, like Jordan Peterson, I live as if God exists. But I don't sit there and kind of like, God's not going through my mind all the time. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say triggered your deconstruction then out of the Christian tradition, like I guess like a more Pentecostal tradition then?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know all about that.
I know. It's just for our audience.
Yeah. So basically, going through all the different segments of Christian belief, pretty much came out the other end because a couple things. Anything from, thanks, Conk. Shun it, unbeliever. Yeah.
He's agnostic, bro.
Shun the agnostics.
Yeah. So basically, two things. I mean, first thing was just sort of the burnout from ministry in general, and then the second thing was the sort of the abyss, I guess you could say, I went into with breaking up with my ex-fiance and all this. So that was just both of those things combining with like just faith and belief kind of went into the tank. And I really started to kind of think to myself, like, well, I mean, with my experiences and my whole entire life, like being a Christian, it's like it's there, but I can never fully get like, some atheist friends that I have are like, well, why don't you just go full atheist? And I'm like, you can't really just throw away all that belief, because like for these kids, these people who are atheists, they had Christianity forced upon them, and then they kind of just see it as like, oh, it's just a circumstance. For me, it's like it went from a circumstance to a choice to a lifestyle to then back to like sort of back. So it's like it's something that I actually committed to, something I actually believed in for a while, willingly wanted to pursue. And I think that's the difference. It's like I actually went through the whole process of like struggling and working through it to then eventually like, okay, this is where I am right now. Like I'll fully explain this to any atheist, and I try to like relate to them on most things, but then they'll like this, because they'll talk to me and they won't think like, they'll know that I was like a Christian, but then I'm not dogmatic or anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say, so I had two quick things, one for Bobby and Amos. The first one was talking about, the doubt in the wrestling with God aspect. Obviously most people, the common thing is Jacob and the angel wrestling, right? And he got injured. And a little fun side pack on that, they injured his hip, I think, or his leg. And I was reading, it was a couple months ago, but I did a book review with Jack Napier, one of our friends of the show, and we were talking about, what was that book? It's already off the tip of my tongue. The one about like rites of passage and the boy to man. It's like the Iron John. That's what it was. Yeah. We're reading Iron John, and there's a small point. It's like a little sub-chapter in a chapter that nobody talks about, but that I think is huge. And it talks about why for a man it's more debilitating to have a leg injury than a head injury. And it's because you're still fully conscious but unable to do anything about it, right? When you lose your mobility and you lose your movement, but you're still fully in your head and you're still fully a man in your head, but you're unable to move or unable to act on that potential you have, it's actually more debilitating than actually just having an actual head injury and affecting your mind. And I thought that was really interesting. When I thought about that, my first thought was, okay, Jacob and the angel were wrestling and they hurt his leg, right? And that's almost like a sense of adding dependence, right? That's more of a dependence on God, because your head's still there. You're still fully rational, but you can no longer move and do freely as you will. Right. Corey,
let me just quickly add something to that. A lot of people don't follow up on that verse. Hebrews 11:12 talks about Jacob, by faith, worshipped God, leaning on the staff where he'd wrestled with God. So he actually, as much as it was damaging, he actually took that as the source of his strength. So that's Hebrews 11:21. I always like to add that in because that actually brings the story full circle. But please continue.
Yeah.
very nice.
And I think that's also what Bobby's talking about. It's that leaning on, right?
Mhm.
Even if it doesn't feel like it, that's the way, essentially it comes from, is when you have that type of I don't know, people hate the word dependence, right? But it means so many things. And so usually, like, if you hear any other replica come saying, oh, you need to be dependent on God. Oh, you're a beta, huh? You're depending on God, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, it is that kind of dependence and your source of faith and power and love and all that stuff coming from that. And I think, if anything, that makes you more free, right? In your head when you do that. Because, I mean, we were just talking about that before with, like, the difference between John and Peter. John boasted in God's love for him, and Peter boasted his love for God, and then failed a bunch of times because he was leaning on himself, right? And then you can realize, wow, I suck at everything. If I lean on myself, I'm gonna fail eventually, right? There's no way a human can be perfect, right? That's a common thing. And so I just kind of want to say about that whole doubt and wrestling aspect is, I think overall it is a good thing because it helps you realize, like, you don't have all the answers. You know what I mean? And that's okay. And guess what? Other humans don't have all the answers either, because there's a lot of people that try to lean on other people for their information, like I was saying with mine, or like people who just, like, blindly quote a pastor or the president or something and say, well, he's right. He's in that authority structure. Nope, he's a human. You know what I mean? And so he can't be right all of the time. So I think that wrestling is good. And I think that wrestling with yourself and your own humility and your own realization that you don't know everything, and that's okay. Getting to that point does involve a lot of wrestling and doubt, I think. But the second point I wanted to talk with Amos. Dude, words are hard today. I don't know what it is. But, like, technically, from a pure logical standpoint, agnosticism is really the only choice if you're going purely off rationality and logic, because both atheism and Christianity require some form of faith or trust in something, right? Like, you admitting that there is a God and you admitting there is no God are both, like, non-logical, if that makes sense. From pure logical rationality from a human being, agnostic technically is the only way. So when I consider myself a Christian, I do have to realize I'm giving up some rationality in that, and it almost goes back to that dependence, or that, that leaning in and realizing, like, okay, my rationality isn't all the way there, and that's okay too. I always think about, like, Kierkegaard's leap of faith, right? You have to jump out of rationality. You have to jump, into the black hole, and you don't know where the ending is, in order to kind of get into that realm, so to speak. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a good, what comes to mind is the opening line of Fides et Ratio, which was an encyclical written by Pope John Paul II about the relationship between faith and reason. And he said that faith and reason are the two wings that allow man to ascend to God. So faith and reason, from, the Catholic perspective, are entirely compatible with each other. And in fact, they actually reinforce each other. They actually, to oversimplify it, they work together like Pippin and Jordan. And because faith is very reasonable, and reason is supposed to be, it's kind of like this: faith is reasonable and reason is supposed to be faithful, if that makes sense. Like they work together, but some people have a hard time, which kind of leads me to a question I had for you guys. If you all struggled with, maybe flirted with atheism or agnosticism, did you guys ever have any moments of, like, honesty with yourself? Like, is this really a dogmatic struggle I have, or are these just emotional reasons why I'm just kind of burned out? Like, maybe I feel unloved by God, or I have a problem with this, ethical code, or this or that. Did any of that ever come into play, or was this purely philosophical for you guys? Which I know is a heck of a question. Like,
Amos, you want to take that first?
Okay, I never really doubted God.
Mm-hmm.
I just question, like, so any good relationship, I believe, there's people want to talk about trust and all this stuff in relationships, and that's good. But I think if there's never any doubt, like, there's something wrong, like that. So that, kind of the difference between, like, blind faith and sort of having your own faith. Again, going back to kind of what I said, I kind of, when I come across individuals that are like talking about God, talking about being a Christian and all this. And anytime I talk about like real life stuff, things they're going through in their life, different situations, and I always kind of hear like, there's a lot of like catchphrases people will say. It's like, hey, let me tell you about this. So I was just, I was having a really hard time this week, and I was reading the scripture, be like, yeah, I received that, brother. Like, there's all these catchphrases people will say to like really just without really acknowledging reality on like, what's going on, like having a real conversation. And I kind of just look at that and I go, well, then you're not really doing it right. So talking about being a Christian, I think require, there's that wrestling aspect. And then, because I've had people I've talked to that'll like come, I'll just watch what they're doing or hear what they're saying. And it's like when people are having a frustration in their, in their life and in their people who are Christians, it's almost like taboo in their mind to kind of like what they think they're blaspheming against God if they like question what's going on. Like just to put it this way, if shit's really hitting the fan and I'm not seeing them like mad and like questioning God, I'm kind of like, oh, you haven't broken that, I think, a threshold into like thoroughly questioning what you believe and why you believe that. Now, some people, they break through that and then maybe they dabble into, they actually go full blown atheist and just say, but I don't believe anything. But at that point, it's more of anger. But then if it's someone that really kind of like figures it out, it's like, oh, okay, it's being real with having a conversation with God and allowing yourself to kind of work out the problem of faith. Like, okay, what do I really believe here? Like, what is wrong that I can't just like, and Christians really have a hard time, even me, like just saying it out loud. Even now where I am, it's like, there's still a bit of that, like, it's like that taboo. Like we're afraid to do it and be like, at what point does you really have to be pushed to be like, fuck you, God, for what's going on in my life? Like, and it's like, do you really hate God? Are you really having these struggles with God? Is God just like, are you starting to doubt if he exists? No. It's, you have such a struggle that you're willing to just question everything. That you're willing to, and in a way, it's a being real with yourself, because that block kind of keeps you from being you. So because we fill it with all these catchphrases, fill it with all these philosophical, theological sort of barriers where it's like, well, okay, if I just, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and I need to do this, I need to do that, and they put these blocks in place that keep them from having a real conversation about anything. And
coping cliches.
Yeah, they use faith as sort of a coping mechanism, and they think if they question that or even come to some terms of reasoning with it, that it's taboo, and that's what it really is. But it's behind this sort of guise of, well, I can't be mad at God, and it's like, yeah, you totally can.
Yeah, it
Like,
kind of reminds me.
Oh yeah, I mean, but yeah, you could just, it's not just that you can be mad at God, is you can hate him for a little bit. Like, you have, like, if he's supposed to be so gracious and loving, I think he can handle it if you get a little frustrated with him. I think it's not some big issue. There's no real unforgivable act in that sense where it's like you completely call him out and chew him out and be mad at him. Now, are you really mad with him? Probably not. It's just you're mad with life. You're frustrated with your situations. But by doing that, it's a barrier. The barrier itself is really what's going in. It's not really God himself that's doing anything. It's your barrier with questioning him. And when you have that reality, kind of, you break through that wall. You kind of go, oh, this is where you start to. So there's the deconstruction that some Christians I've come across kind of get so caught up in. They're like, I'm just going to deconstruct. And they're just like, I'm going to joke about everything. Look at me. I am so not a religious Christian anymore. Religion is so not. They're religiously anti-religious.
Exactly.
Look at me, I'm so not into Christianity anymore, and it's all just woo. I'm smoking weed, doing LSD. Everything's so great, and I mean, it's like more insufferable than Joe Rogan talking about DMT. It's just woo.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah, it just kind of really, and then it's like, where are you really going with this? And they're sitting there posting, they're posting pictures of themselves doing like meditation stances and all this stuff. And look at me, I'm so non-religious. And it's like, but there's the balance of like, yeah, I'm not really religious anymore, but I don't really like, I'm in a constant state of being real with myself and being real with my belief. I'm not sitting here like there's no holds barred when it comes to like what me and God got going on. So sorry, go ahead. You guys had something to say.
It reminded me of like what you're saying here, like breaking the threshold and all that kind of stuff. It kind of reminds me of like modern American politics, where it's just the conservative and liberals are taking turns yelling at each other, talking points, and sending each other clickbait articles, that have their point in the top. But nobody reads the article, right? Nobody's actually sitting discussing it. They're just yelling their points across at each other, right? There's no... And like you can say that with atheists and Christians, or like what you're saying here, Amos, like having a real talk with God. Between you and God, you're just saying catchphrases over and over again, right? But you're not having that honest talk like, okay, this is me, this is my real life. What do I actually believe? What's actually going on, God? You know what I mean? Instead of the, all of the catchphrases and the little slogans and bumper stickers to try to get your way through life, You're not having that honest conversation.
I received that, Brother Conk.
God is good all the time.
All the time.
I mean, Corey, was it a doctrinal thing for you when you got into atheism, or was there like a doctrinal conflict?
I guess so, yeah. But I know when I was there, like I said before, it was a completely blind faith to blind faith transition. There wasn't really any growth or upgrading. It was, I blindly followed the church because that's what everyone did. And then I started reading a bunch of atheist stuff. And then I just started blindly following them because they sounded smarter. You know what I mean? And like, I was bored with school. I was bored with work. I was bored with the conversations I was having with people in church and out of church. And I was just like, I just wanted to find something that was better or higher than that. Right. And so while I was in it, I felt like, oh, look at all these stupid people doing, basic addition, subtraction. I'm over here learning calculus, those plebs, right? And then, but what I come to realize is they're all doing pre-algebra too. You know what I mean? There's just as cooler, smarter words. But they like at face value, it looked like they were dismantling all of the stuff we believed in. But really, they weren't necessarily attacking Christianity. It was more of attacking the church today kind of thing. And that I still wholeheartedly agree with. That's the whole point of why I wanted to start the show, is because the church today is such a caricature of what it was, right? It's almost like a cartoon character of what we're actually supposed to be doing, and like that real talk, real life aspect of dealing with God and Christianity and religion and other people. You know what I mean? There's a lot there to digest and delve through and learn more about. But just like the superficialness of the church at the time I was in and the atheism were both superficial. It was, just like I was talking about, it was two people yelling talking points and not talking, right? Yeah. There wasn't a discussion. It was just take turns yelling through clickbait articles that someone else wrote that you didn't read. Yeah.
Exactly. So Bobby, to answer your question, and then I have a question that will go around. Is there anything that will make you stop believing? So you guys can start thinking on that. So to your question, Bobby, was it doctrinal? No, my doctrine was, the problem is my doctrine painted God as good, and I wasn't seeing the fruits of it in my life. That was really what it was. So I thought the doctrine was pretty sound, and it was reformed and transformed many, many times. The problem was I wasn't seeing the actual fruit of it coming out. So that was my biggest struggle. And just like Amos was saying, there's some answers we just don't know. And I in our church, we were very much discouraged from not having the answer. We did all the apologetics, William Lane Craig and, Dinesh D'Souza, and we used to listen to all the debates, and we had an answer for pretty much everything except real life. So, for instance, I shared that, we were part of a healing ministry, and there have been times I've literally seen some ridiculous miracles of, body parts appearing, deaf ears opening, all these great things. But then I go and pray for my sister and she dies. And then I go pray for my dad and he dies. And then I pray for my cousin, she dies. And then I prayed for my uncle, he dies. And another time I go and I pray for a whole bunch of people in a hospital and they all get healed. And the whole ward is cleared out. And I go home and I can't pay my phone bill. And it's like, what? This, I could not wrap my head around it. And the more I try to figure it out, as it's like either all my doctrine is wrong and I deconstructed that as best I could. Okay, well then maybe there's no God. I tried the atheism thing. And then at the end of the day, I just walked away saying, well, I just don't know. But I know that he's got me. And even though I don't have the answer, he has the answer. And he's holding on to me. I'm not offending him. It's not like he didn't know what I was going to do. He knows everything, right? His expectation for my life is not on my shoulders. It's on his. So it's just like, all right, I don't know the answer. I don't think anybody does. I trust you. If I ever find out, great. If not, you've got me. And that's kind of been my philosophy going forward.
Yeah, that's very honest and mature and transparent owning of that struggle, man. That's great, man.
Yeah, thank you. So, gentlemen, this is the ultimate test. What would actually make you return to atheism or to give up the faith? Maybe let's start with that. Bobby, you had a nice break listening to the three of us. Would you like to start with that?
Yeah, it'll be an answer that kind of probably totally sidesteps the question, but for me, I just think of the part of the Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas where he talks about how pretty much the only thing that will ultimately take away our faith is when we die and go to heaven, because faith will be replaced with knowledge. It'll no longer have a place in a sense, because you only believe in what you don't see. So I guess for me, it's Lord willing, I make it to the end. Short of that, I've experienced so much tragedy in my life so far. If that hasn't taken me away from God, I really don't know what will, to be honest. I hope that day doesn't come. We're all tough guys when we're far removed from the situation. Like, I don't want to commit the presumption of St. Peter where, Lord, I'll die for you. I'll go to prison for you. And then just a few hours later, he can't even stand up to a girl warming herself by the fire about whether or not he knows Jesus. So yeah, for me, that's a tough one, man. I don't know what could take me away from God, because
that's a fair answer.
Because I've never been the type, and I'm not saying people who leave God are, I've never been the type to scapegoat God. It's like I said, even when I had that analogy of him being the animal control specialist, I never hated him for that. I just couldn't understand why he wasn't doing anything. But as I got older and as I got out of those situations, or through the gift of hindsight, I looked back and I thank him for not babying me. I thank him for not coddling me and, picking up the cross and, taking it from me, because so I hope I stick with him.
Amen. Corey, what is your thoughts on what would make you stop believing?
Honestly, a time machine. If we get a time machine and we could go fact check everything that's written in the Bible and in the scriptures and church history, and spare that. Like I said before, like in general, humans are stupid, right? We don't know that much. Our perceptive of reality is very skewed, and our thinking is not perfect, right? It's very limited compared to how much information is actually out there. So unless we can make a time machine, go back and literally fact check every part of the Bible, and if it doesn't add up, or you could see somebody making it up on their own in the house, maybe then. But outside of that, in our current reality where there is no time travel, I don't really think anybody could really make the ultimate debate point that there's no God, or find the ultimate evaluation that there is no God, or something like that. I think unless outside of a time machine, I think this is what we got, and this is what I'm going with,
Yeah. Good answer, man. Amos, what do you think, man? What would make you go full atheist, as the atheist team is cheering for you?
Nothing would steer off my faith. I believe him ultimate. No, let's see.
He's pandering.
Yeah, I got
Here's your
Taking a
atheist
knee
God
for
now.
God. He's taking a knee.
So you guys know that like the comic that
Fake.
people have posted, like it's like a picture of like Jesus and this one guy, and he says, "Hey, look," he's like, "What are those?" He goes, "Oh, those are the steps. Like, those are where I walked with you." And he goes, "And what about those like those lines there?" And he goes, "Oh, that's where I dragged you." And that's going to kind of show, drag you kicking and screaming, kind of people like, oh, Jesus bearing all this stuff for you, kind of stringing you along and stuff. And I kind of wonder, like, they could extend that even further to be more real. It's like, yeah, that's the part where you you tried to beat the shit out of me. This is the part where you ran away and went the other way, but then you kind of came back later, like, kind of showing like people don't just have like I had this, I was a Christian and I had a little struggle and then everything was great. It's like, no, I think you need to be like, I was a Christian, then I really struggled, then I just didn't believe anymore, and then I started believing something else, and then I thought God didn't even exist anymore, and then I came back, and then I went off over here again. Then I started I started making fun of Christians in churches, and then I came back. Like, I think people really need to like fully explore. But to what would make me not believe? Probably now a time machine, but for different reasons.
Nope, only mine. I did it right. You have to follow me.
Not that we would go back. I would go back to like go see if I mean, that'd be part of it. But I think the big thing would be to go back and talk to myself. Kind of go back to the place where I was when I first started believing, and kind of, if I was able to kind of watch myself go through the entire process, like I would probably deconstruct it so much that I'd almost talk myself out of it. Like if I could somehow go back and observe myself. Like, oh, here's in middle school when I just, when I went up during the traditional, if you don't want to accept Jesus in your heart, come up front. And then there's that. And then watching myself, like, just because knowing yourself and kind of watching like what's going through my mind and kind of like, okay, like I think I would almost talk myself out of it. Okay, that wasn't genuine. That wasn't genuine. That wasn't genuine. I'd be just kind of like, but then that'd probably make me more of like an atheist out of circumstance instead of an atheist out of conviction. Because I see a lot of these atheists that are out of atheists because of circumstance. Religion was kind of just part of their life because it was, and then they just kind of were, now they're the entitled 14-year-old reading the Bible very arrogantly, kind of like, this book's not even real, but I'm just gonna read. Have you guys seen that? There's a meme. It says it's like a cassette tape, and it says the Bible being read by an arrogant 14-year-old atheist or something.
No.
There's an actual podcast of that, by the way.
I gotta see that.
It's very interesting.
It's just a meme. It's just a picture, and it's really funny. Like I've sent that to people. Like, is this you? Like,
send that in our little group chat. But hey, have you guys ever been tempted to turn the tables on someone? Like, you always have these people that, like, when they try to lead you in the sinner's prayer, they always hit you with the cliche of, one day you're going to die, and God's going to say, why should I let you in?
Oh, I love that.
You ever been tempted to say, well, why should I let God into my heart? Like, you ever been tempted to ask him that kind of thing? And the thing about God is he became man. He came down to our level. The
incarnation.
Yeah. The entire point of the prophets is God was selling us on himself. He was trying to sell humanity on why we should love him and trust him and obey him. And he sent a salesman to us,
Yeah. Just to answer the question for myself, I think Corey had the best answers in terms of the time machine.
Oh yeah.
I gave you all the sticking points that I had in terms of, the issues with information and the beginning. And if you could figure out a better explanation for the resurrection of Christ, the time machine would be a good answer to that. But if somebody actually came up with a reasonable explanation for the resurrection of Christ that really fulfilled all the criteria, I would definitely be more open. Or if the God of the atheist showed up and basically said, I am the God of the atheist, I'd become an atheist then. But beyond that,
The God of the atheists.
yeah, if the atheist God showed up and said, "I am God," then I'd become an atheist, I suppose. But yeah,
all hail athe.
It would stand on the. I mean, I could explain all the miracles. I can deconstruct pretty much any doctrine. I can't get past the resurrection. I can't get past DNA information, the source of the information. A couple other historical things, and maybe science might fill that in. So I'm not banking on that. But those are still kind of my sticking points at the end of the day, and that's what kind of really, even all the experiences, all the goosebumps, all the visions and visitations. I mean, yeah, I'd have to put it back to that. So that
Do we
would
got
be
any
my
questions,
take.
by the way?
No. I mean, my friend Terrence is in the chat, and he's being a little bitch. Sorry, Terrence. I had to say that. Yeah, Tristan, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but yeah. Terrence is actually the gentleman. He and I were involved in the church. He's now an atheist, so I would have loved for him to come on and ask a couple questions. His wife is watching as well. Trista is a good friend of mine. She also had some questions, but no, they haven't jumped in. I've left the offer. They could keep the camera off. He says he's not looking his best and all this, but he's kind of wussed out a little bit. I'm a little disappointed, man. So yeah, we'll see what he's having a good time in the chat though. I mean, another thing that I wanted to say on that would be, especially you, Corey, when you got into reading some of the atheistic works, I found the atheists were definitely good at asking some really good questions that you do not find in the church. The problem of evil, some of the massacres and stuff like that, issues around human nature. And I think these are discussions we should be having in the church about a lot of the fuck ups that have happened. But we tend to try and gloss over it. So I always appreciated reading atheist literature for that perspective. I don't know if in your studies you found anything like that.
Yeah, I think at times they do ask interesting questions that I think Christians should really evaluate. But, I mean, as a whole, from the Christian atheist, debates, if you even want to call them that, it's more of just yelling. They're like refusing to peer in, right? It's obviously two opposing parties talking, and they're not trying to find middle ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are times where people are honestly, but usually it doesn't come from like books and forums. It's usually a guy and a guy talking. You know what I mean? More often than not, that's probably where it comes from, trying to find common ground and trying to, in a debate, hypothetically adopting each other's worldview to see like a what if thing, right? Not, that's probably where
yeah.
But I think one of the good examples of this was one of my favorite debates of all time. Did I miss something great? I don't know.
Yeah,
look who we just added in.
Oh.
Yeah. So
nice.
Go ahead, Corey. Just finish up your point.
One of the things, like, to me, one of my favorite debates, it's like on DVD, and you could probably look it up online somewhere, but it's Douglas Wilson, who's a Calvinist, and Christopher Hitchens before he died.
Yes.
And they had all these formal debates, and it never really got anywhere, but they had a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff where they would go to the bar and hang out afterwards and talk, and had way better conversations than anything on the debate platform, right? And that's something I absolutely love watching, because we talked about this a little bit with Ryan Stone briefly, but like, I love Christopher Hitchens, atheist or not. He's a cool dude. And you could tell he's doing it more for the fun of it and not trying to like, oh, your Christians are evil and ruining the world and I have to stop them all. He's kind of doing it for fun, right?
Yes.
He enjoys it. And it looks like he is actually actively building relationships and understands the humanity aspect instead of, objectifying. Like, we always hear the word objectifying, like, oh, that woman's hot in porn or something, right? But the objectifying of the other party, just like people do with like any kind of debate, left versus right, liberal, conservative, atheist, Christian, Broncos and Chiefs, I'm going to keep using that. A lot of times we'll get so extreme in our debates and our thoughts that it becomes objectifying, right? They're just a bad guy, us versus them. And I think trying to find that middle ground is where actual conversations will happen, right? And it's really hard to do group versus group. It's kind of a personal versus personal thing. All right, I'm done ranting.
I'd agree. So we got the atheist bitch in here, so that's a good sign. You want to unmute yourself, man? I mean, do you want to stay anonymous?
No, I mean, I know who I am. You guys.
Welcome to the party.
Well,
Oh, we got another spectator. Just ask her to mute her mic.
Yeah, mute your mic, bitch. Atheist bitch.
Well, there's a lot of female dogs in this chat. Jeez.
No, I just want to say first of all, I really enjoyed your show, though. I mean, one kicks aside, I enjoy hearing you guys' perspectives and so on. It's really illuminating to hear different paths that everybody takes, and it's learning. I mean, I don't agree with you guys obviously, but it's the best way for me is to like hear people that don't agree with me, and that way I can understand a lot more rather than just assume what people think and that sort of thing. So I really appreciate letting me come in here and be a bit disruptive. But go ahead, sorry.
Did you have a question though? Did you have a question you wanted to kind of ask the panel?
Yeah, I had a few of them, but I don't want to hijack the whole thing. So the main question, I guess, for me out of everything that I've listened to, I guess for each of you guys, which would be interesting to hear, is I have it written down here so I don't mess it up. So I want to ask, like, how do each of you think that your life would change, like if at all, right? If for some reason you stop believing or was no longer convinced that a God exists. I think each of you is a monotheist. Like, how do you think that your life would change, or what do you see, like, for a couple of years, what would your life be different? How would it be different?
So just to translate from that broken English,
You look like Hero from Heroes, dude. How you doing, man?
Doing good. Did you guys get the question?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
How
would our life look different if we didn't embrace any religion, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, more so like if you didn't believe, no, forget religion. Like there's a point where I didn't believe in any religion, but I believed that God was God. It was still a God. It might have been Jesus or something, but it would have been like, some type of God. Maybe Spinoza was God eventually, or something like that. But what I mean is, like, if for some reason, like, each of you seems to have a belief, like there is some foundation for belief, but I'm not even talking about foundation. I just want to know, like, if, like, for some reason, like Brook was asking just now, what would change your mind? But beyond what would change your mind, let's say your mind was changed. You were in a position where you don't believe in God right now. Like, how do you envision that impacting your life, like, as it is right now? That's what I'm kind of interested to find out.
I'll go first, and that's a great question. ABIH. I bet. We'll call him I bet. No, it's a great question. I guess in my case, we hear a lot about the word orthodoxy, which means, correct belief. But the sister of orthodoxy is orthopraxy, which means proper practice, right? So if my orthodoxy took a hit, if my orthodoxy turned into heterodoxy, then my orthopraxy would turn into heteropraxy, which is a pretty common pattern. Like, in other words, I would, like, if I stopped believing, I would spend the rest of my life trying to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, which would be a pretty miserable existence for me, just because of all the people I've read about and have met that spent their entire lives doing those very two things, of trying to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And oftentimes that's a lot of what brings people to religion, what brings people to God, because they're thinking, man, there's got to be more to life than this. So I'm willing to take their word for that would not be the Epicurean existence of just, like I said, maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, would not make me happy. But at the same time, I guess I'm afraid of what I would do, because most people see God as an obstacle to their to things that they want to pursue. Right? His commands are obstacles. Like, I can't just, for me as a practicing Catholic, I can't just, have sex outside of marriage, for example. So usually when people leave God, the first thing to go is basically all the things that they, I guess, like all the virtues or all the things that they restrained themselves from while they were, in God's service. So, for me, I guess I would just become a miserable Epicurean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Corey, you wanna chime in?
Oh boy, dude, I don't know if I could handle myself, to be honest. I'm a very extreme go big or go home guy. I'd probably be setting up some autonomous zones myself. Like, I think I would honestly go off the deep end. kind of like we were talking about before, that leaning on it. I think that's very important for me because, to be brutally honest, I already live a chaotic life, and that would be exponential if I didn't have any kind of foundation to believe in, right? I would be very untethered out in the open waters. But like, I mean, I said it briefly at the beginning as like a half joke, but not. But like that punk rebel side, like you've all seen that Seattle autonomous zone that's going on. I probably would have started a couple of those, to be honest, because it sounds fun. But I'm keeping my cool. You know, I'm being a little bit more reasonable and open about stuff now, and less my way or the highway living. And so, honestly, I don't know if the question is if I never if I never started believing, I honestly feel like I'd probably be dead right now because I'm not smart in my choices. I'm smart in my thinking, but not in my choices because I like going to extremes. But if it was like today, I completely deconverted. I think if I can still dwell on at least the knowledge and wisdom I learned through being a believer and then not believing, I think I would still be a lot more leveled out than I would be otherwise. I don't know if that answers it well, but yeah, I would definitely be living a crazy freaking life. I'd be on the news a lot. Probably for bad reasons, but
yeah, I would. Oh, Amos, you want to go?
I disagree. There, that's fine.
Good talk.
If I never believed to begin with, I'd say so. I don't think I would be an Epicurean. I think so. Just using the understanding that I have right now, most people, I think, like I would definitely like be in a position where I think I'd be open to the idea. Like I'd probably be on the other side of it, so I'd be like, oh, okay. There's religious people out there, they believe in this, and that's cool. Like, I wonder if maybe I'll be like just because nowadays, just with my beliefs, I'm like more empathetic to hear people out on different views from where I am. So I'm kind of like, oh, okay, so you believe in that, and which is why I can get along with both. Mostly, most of the time Christians and also like atheists and such. Like I can be, all things to all people, so to speak, to hear people out, listen to different views. Now, on the other side of that, with basically being someone that wouldn't believe, there's most social conventions at least would keep me in line to like do certain things in my life. Maybe my life would go on a different path. Maybe I wouldn't be red-pilled, with like intersexual dynamics and stuff because it was religion. It was my beliefs and the path I took that led me down to meet the people I met. So maybe I'd just be some like, some blue pill guy that doesn't really have much foundation. And, there would have to be something else that would probably make me believe in something. Like there'd be another foundational belief in my life, non-religious, that would dictate my life. And maybe I would just be, boring old normie. You don't know. It's the faith and the red pill and a lot of these other beliefs that all kind of like influence my life choices and the course that my life took to lead me to where I am right now. So if I didn't have any of that, I really wouldn't know. I'd probably just fill it with something else and probably just be a boring normie.
Good answer. Good answer.
I'd be there just living my life, hearing about some random guy in Missouri that starts, doing crazy shit and be like, oh, that's an interesting life. And then that's it. Like,
and you never know it was me.
Yeah, I would have never met you, and I'd hear about, maybe some guy that went off to Thailand and overdosed on something. And then there'd be this crazy guy, in Trinidad that, just who's that?
Died of a rum overdose.
Exactly, rum overdose.
And by the way, Brook, after you go, we've had Tris waiting very patiently.
I know this is the atheist's wife, so I'm just going to be very brief on the side.
Atheist wife.
Yeah, this is the atheist wife, so I do know the two of them. Very
okay.
quickly, I would probably be Buddhist, ironically, because that's what I was before. And that's actually an atheistic religion in a sense, and it's about reaching nirvana, and it's kind of like trying to evolve your humanism sort of thing. So I don't think my life would change that much. Even when I did do my atheist run, my life really, in a sense, did not move that much. I would just shift the focus, especially if today I found out the whole Christian thing was false with the experience I've had. I would believe that there's so much human potential and power that's untapped. I would become Buddhist and seek to like tap into whatever power the human inherently have, kind of thing. So
You gotta fill that God-shaped hole in your heart, bro.
yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, a lot of atheists actually do that, I think. But
I think that's okay. And brother, I hope sometime we have you back on the show, because I know you and I have some great behind the scenes stories. But we'd like to hear from your wife if she'd unmute herself and ask her question. Hey Tris, how you doing?
Hey guys, I'm good. You hearing me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. I like hearing from you guys. With regards to the Buddhist thing, though, Brooke, I think because currently I am an atheist, but if in terms of looking at back from where I was as a Christian, how I used to think, how I came about my beliefs, now getting into things a little more, reading a little more about history is what made my real turn, like understanding why we are here based on evidence that we've seen or things that we've seen happen over time. But generally, I get your point, and I'm enjoying the show. It's pretty good, guys. I mean, I understand you guys' perspective with regards to, being Christian, because I understand you. I was Christian. I understand how you feel. I understand why you feel the way that you're feeling. Circumstances, like I'm listening to Bobby and listening to his life, and he's talking about what happened in the past. I had a pretty hard life too. Wasn't very simple and easy breezy, and two parents, and it was kind of hard. And it brought me to questions that couldn't be answered when you go to the priest or when I go to my pastor and they give me this blank look. It was really fucking frustrating. I mean, because you have hard questions that you need answered, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But it like I say, I enjoy this. I'll let you guys continue and I'll listen on.
Did you have a question? Because we're wrapping up now, Tris, so I don't know if you had something you wanted to ask us before we close up.
Well, my big question was regards to faith. Like I see you guys talk a lot about your faith in things, and how you believe what you believe. But for me, what would you say your faith is in regards? I mean, so like Amos, you were talking about you now believe in things with regards to how you think, interact, how you feel. You're not really get onto the Bible and that sort of thing. I don't know if I got you correctly. Your thoughts are based on how you interact with God personally, which is where I was. I was like, God and me. If there's a God, me and God, we're cool, Lyman, things are great, and He'll speak to me. So I want to know, where when you talk about faith, what do you have faith in that aspect? I don't know. I guess I could become a little raw with this, but just what do you have faith in? Because for me, God Himself, okay, what do you guys have faith in? I'll leave it at that.
My classic definition of faith is, and I know I always go back to Aquinas, but it basically, you basically have faith in he who can neither deceive nor be deceived. In other words, your faith in God is based on the credibility of the person who's revealing the things you have faith in. So just to give you kind of a quick analogy I heard one time that's always been really useful is like, you have this world-class, world champion tightrope walker. This guy's like in Guinness Book of World Records. He got the Olympic gold medal for walking a tightrope, if there is such a thing. And this guy's like a really good friend of yours. And so one day you're up on the mountains and he puts, there's this tightrope between these two big mountain peaks, 10,000 foot drop. And for a fact that your best friend is the world's greatest tightroper. You've seen him win championships. You've been in the front row of his competitions, etc. And he asks you, he says, Tris, do you believe I'm the greatest tightrope walker in the world? You say, well, of course. I've seen you win championships. I was there cheering you. And he says, well, how much do you believe? He goes, so much. So he said, so he says, Tris, do you believe I could walk across these two mountain peaks on this tightrope? You say, yes, I do. He walks across, he walks back, boom. He says, well, do you believe I could walk across this tightrope and I push a wheelbarrow across the tightrope and still do it? And you say, well, yeah. He walks across the wheelbarrow, he does it. Then he puts, 120 pounds worth of cement bags in the wheelbarrow. He says, do you believe I can wheel this wheelbarrow across on these two tightropes without falling to my death? And you say, yeah, I think you can. He wheels it across and back, boom, no hitch. And then he says, Tris, how much do you weigh? He said, about 110, 120 pounds. And he says, why don't you jump in this wheelbarrow and let me wheel you across? You just saw me wheel these 120 pounds of concrete across. You weigh 120. Why don't you jump in and let me wheel you across? That's what faith is. If that makes sense. That to me, that's what my definition of faith is. If you can understand that parable, you can understand faith.
Yeah, well, I understand. Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. Just for me, in that scenario, the guy would have done a lot of things in the past where I could see he could carry, these weird, whatever it is that he's doing, dropping on a rope, whatever. He has proven himself athletically. I see that he is capable of it. So that's my evidence. I say, oh, well, now in regards to me in the wheelbarrow, I may think a second time and say, hey, you guys, you're doing what you do. You seem to be doing well. I'll leave him at that. I say, like, when you get me involved, I need a disclaimer, right? But in light of it, I have evidence in that sense. For me, this is personally for me. When it came to God and when it comes to certain things and questions that I had, there wasn't hard evidence for me to rely on. It was very vague. So yes, I'd see people talk about it. So in my society and people around me, they were very convinced, this is what it is. And yeah, you're going to get through with this. But I found that for me, some of the things that they were convinced about just wasn't happening. And when I looked around, I saw not just for me, but others, I say there's something happening. We're not getting that result. Sometimes the result comes in for those who are closest to the pastor, they get that result. Or maybe those who have a family unit to rely on, they get that result. But me, I don't have all of that. So I don't get those results, in that sense. For evidence for that faith then.
Yeah, Tris, I would completely agree with you. As I was kind of saying in the conversation, you can deconstruct pretty much anything. And I agree. Trust does not come out of a vacuum. It does come from experience, and it comes from seeing evidence or somebody proving themselves trustworthy. Trust is not, or faith is just not something imposed. It's sometimes, it has to have some kind of track record to know that there's trust. And that led to my crisis of faith, is because I, like what you're saying, I did not see a lot of that going on. And it got to a point of frustration. It's like either my doctrine is wrong or there is no God. And I tried both extremes, both positions, and I still wasn't any better off. And I just gave up and be like, look, if there is a God and he wants me to trust, he's got to make me trust him, because I'm not seeing anything trustworthy. And I left it at that. And that was kind of how I walked away from it. And over time, I believe he's kind of softened me in that area, not really something I've done. And so I can't give you anything beyond anecdotal evidence for that, but I completely understand your position. And I think that's a very honest position the church is probably not very comfortable with.
Yeah, correct. I know you guys to finish soon, but that's exactly it. That is where a lot of my big questions came in, was where is the evidence for what you're doing? I mean, I had questions before. I had, I've seen little things, little itty bitty things. You want this job, I want to get this, probably this outfit, what the hell it is. But when it came to my mom and when she was dying, I was like, hey, God, so my mom is sick, and you and I are close. I believe in you, and what are you going to do here? What's going to happen here? And I just saw her progressively getting worse. And I mean, for me right now, I'm settled with it. I mean, Brook, with regards to mom's death, I mean, that's life. But when you think about it, at that particular time, it was a very big time in my life, and a big time. And I say, hey, guy, like in a relationship with any guy, and you have a big question, and you say, you're going to marry me? And he said, well, I don't know. So this was my, hey, you're going to marry me, God? What were we in here for? You with me with this? And then he says, well, I know now. I don't know what I'm doing here. I mean, it's a big question. And when you see the result of death, that's when it led me to ask more questions. It led me into a different direction, to start asking about my mortality in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Trish, we are going to be wrapping up here.
Yeah.
Please come on at some other time when we're doing the show.
Yeah.
And we would definitely get into more detail about this exact issue, because I prayed for your mom as well. And that was also a turning point for me. So I think it would be great to have that discussion. But thank you so much for coming on, and let's have the chat. Let's have the chat some other time.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, guys. Thanks.
Yeah. Nice meeting you, Trish.
Yeah. All right, guys. So we'll talk to you guys later. We're going to wrap up the show. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Gentlemen, final thoughts. And who's doing part 2 next week then?
Probably on my channel,
Corey.
right?
I think, we go to Bobby's channel next. So that's the Bobby Leon Show. Links are in the description. Bobby, what just closing thoughts? Anything you want to kind of close up with?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going through doubts, man, just cling to God with everything you have. And just like it says in Job 13:15, though the Lord slay you, yet I will trust in him. If it feels like he's slaying you, he's got good reason. He's a surgeon who prefers not to put you under with anesthesiology. And it's a very painful operation, but very necessary. So those are my closing thoughts.
Corey, to you, my man.
Yeah, I'd say my final thoughts is, I mean, wrapping up what I said before was like, if you're a Christian that wants to talk to atheists and atheists that wants to talk to Christians, or you yourself are doubting one way or the other, like, make sure you're having genuine conversation and not clickbaiting, right? Don't this is a pretty big deal, right? Especially if we think like life and afterlife, if we're believing that and that's a genuine thing, this makes it a very dire situation, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're wrestling with these things in your own life and your own personal growth, don't just pick a side and hoorah away, right? Really delve into it, find out for yourself, talk to actual peers, instead of yelling at people online and trying to find things that justify your beliefs, right? Do the work, so to speak, as somebody we know with a different bald guy with a beard than the ones here. But yeah,
Amos, closing thoughts, my friend.
Well, obviously being a Christian myself, I don't think about anything.
The perfect Christian.
Yeah, I no thoughts about anything. It's all purely faith.
Got a book of the Bible named after him too.
Yeah, he does. He does. He's the most famous among us.
You guys never heard of the book of Conk? It's coming out.
It's one of those Gnostic gospels that you didn't hear about.
Written in 2021. Yeah, written.
I think, when it comes to faith, when it comes to questioning things, people need to properly flesh things out. And a lot of people kind of are even afraid. Like I said, there's that threshold, there's that wall of questioning God, and people kind of like, oh, so you need to like hate God or be mad at God. It's like, yes and no. Like it's not really that you're mad at God. It's more so it's a way by which your mind sort of crosses over into a place where it's comfortable having this conversation. Because people, it's like, they sit there and then it's like if you're talking to a bunch of Christians and you were like, yeah, I was having a really rough week, and you just gotta hold, and then they kind of make a course correction in their mind, like, well, I just gotta trust in God, brother, and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, like have that frustration, flush it out, let it run through you to be like, shit's really hit the fan, and I kind of wonder, like, does God really give a shit about me? And now, does it mean you're like sitting there and you're just completely doubting God and you're completely hating God and you're just all this stuff? Not necessarily. It's just it's being real with yourself. And once you kind of cross over that, actually, I find people tend to have a stronger connection to what do you want to call it, believing in God, or just having a sense of faith in their life. Like I say it, for me, it's like, it's not really like God, God with me or God separate from me or anything. It's just, it's me and God kind of living out this life at the same time. Anything, yes, you want to go and say like, yeah, he knows what's going to happen. He knows everything about me there is to know, past, present, future. But at the same time, there is this experience that he's going through life with me to be like, if shit hits the fan and I get mad and I'm frustrated, it's just being frustrated with life. But I think he's so part of my life that I'm also frustrated with, kind of situations. And then in turn, I start to say things like, kind of looking, you see in movies and shows and stuff, people kind of look up at the sky like, what the fuck? Like, there's that. Like, that needs to be, I think people need to be comfortable with that if they want to be properly in tune with what they believe. Whereas if they're just kind of like, they won't look up, they won't look down, they just kind of, well, I just need to pray more and, tithe more or whatever, and maybe do some fasting, and all that doubt will go away.
Boy, do I want to do an episode on tithing. Boy, do I.
Oh, we will. We will. Just very quickly on my final thoughts of that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a crisis of faith. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking questions. In fact, a good friend of ours, Amos and myself, Joshua Tongle, has been known for asking some of the best questions. He doesn't actually have all the answers, and that's fine as well.
The best questions.
The best questions, yeah.
Those questions are huge.
Oh, yeah. And I think today's Trump's birthday. Today's Trump's birthday, by the way. So, happy birthday to the President of the United States. Yeah,
and from the UK.
Yeah, and if some people got to go through atheism in their growing process, I have no problem with that. In our theology, God is in everything. He's holding creation together. He's not threatened by your unbelief. If he really wants you to come out of that, I have full faith that he will pull you out. I can't necessarily convince people of that. That's just been my personal experience. So
you have full faith that God will pull out, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And on that fine note, Amos. We are ending the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. Make sure and hit the subscribe button. Comment if you've got questions. Next week, we're on Bobby Leon's show. All the content links are below if you want to contact anybody on the show. Thanks to our guests coming on, guys. I really appreciate it. We have to catch up sometime. Amos and myself are running off to the 10K Rum podcast in 14 minutes on the 10K Rum podcast channel. Links below. And we will see all of you next week. Thanks for watching, everyone.